jazz series from the U.S. Postal Service and had it put in a plexiglass frame, and then he can put his computer mouse on it.
But I thought that would
Scratch it?
well, it wouldn't give it the honor it deserves. So have it here as a plaque. Keep it here.
We're in Stephen's friend Joe Spahn's office at the hospital, and this is the National Jewish Hospital, and there's the old TB center here, very similar to the one that Grandma Fannie was treated and died in.
This is my floppy office.
This is from after my brother gave me that.
This is the oldest building here at the Jewish Hospital. This was the old Tuberculosis Hospital here in Denver. It was similar to the hospital that Grandma Dorfman was treated in and eventually died in. And you can see where this is part of the more modern, newer hospital that Steve's friend, Joe Spahn, works at. And that Stephen has a little bit of a hard time with the newer architecture versus the old one. Where Grandma was treated for tuberculosis and where she died. This is the Texas Pavilion for Women. We think that Grandma was in one of these buildings here. Here's the synagogue. And here's more of the buildings.
Dorfman, giving us their best. Brothers Dorfman at the AMC Medical Center. This is where Grandma Dorfman apparently lived many, many years ago. We're looking at a beautiful courtyard, and you can see it's still a very beautiful campus, quiet. You'd never know that we were one block north of Colfax, one of the busiest streets in Denver. And this is the synagogue. I don't know. This is a good mug shot of both Ted and Steve Dorfman, the brothers Dorfman.
Again, it's part of the cancer center. This is where Grandma was. Building for the Jewish Comsumptive Relief Center, JCRS.
March 1925.
In 1906 it was erected, it had two erections. Now a finance administrative center. Again, we suspect the Grandma was somewhere in here. This is, again, a building erected by the Jewish Comsumptive Relief Society, and this is the, you might be able to see, the New York Ladies Auxiliary. Stephen's friend, Joe Spahn, is telling us that tuberculosis was an epidemic, and they sent people here to Denver because they felt that they would live longer in a high altitude, and apparently there is some medical basis for believing that that could be correct for some people. Here's a closer photo of this building, and this was erected in 1922, New York Ladies Auxiliary, which probably indicates that many Jewish women suffering from TB on the East Coast probably made their way here. You can imagine what this was like in the 20s, the 30s, with probably hundreds of women suffering from tuberculosis being cared for here, and with little hope for cure. Just kind of prolonging their life, living in a hospice situation. And that was the fate of Grandma. I guess the synagogue is symbolic of how these women made their way to Denver, who were suffering from tuberculosis throughout the country, but primarily on the East Coast. It was through the community of the Jews. It was erected initially in 1911, and then it was re-erected in 1925. Stephen thinks that this was a sample or a kind of like a display of the rooms that the people stayed in. Here's the bed.
Wheelchair.
This is from the other side with less reflection. The basin, chair, the bed. This is the life that our grandmother had until she passed away. Look at the beautiful masonry work, the stone. It's shaped as a candle flame there above the Star of David. What a life our grandmother must have had, brief and full of illness. Unable to be with her son, Bob. We were able to spot Grandma's grave right there. Okay? We're going to walk into the cemetery here shortly. Here it is. Here's the abandoned building we parked at. Here's the pauper's grave. We're going to be walking in just a moment. And from Mr. Ruskin, who is the person who is responsible for bringing this pauper's grave back from total neglect, he's told us the history of things here and how they're applying for grants to get a gate put here and to have a security fence put around, because at one time, not too long ago, these stones were all knocked over, vandals had been here, and again, these people were buried with very little money. They sold whatever they had, let's say a trunk or clothing, and they buried them for like 30 cents to $1. And then they were forgotten about. Mr. Ruskin said it's very hard to trace the families of the people who died before 1940. Then on the other side is the cemetery of the wealthier Jews, but here on the hill is the pauper cemetery. It certainly brings about thoughts of what her life was like, coming from Russia with Dad and contracting tuberculosis and coming here to Denver and spending the remainder of her life in the hospice and having very little contact with Father.
And Ted, her 100th birthday's coming up.
Her 100th birthday is right, it's coming up for shortly. in the same time frame, 31. Mrs. Weber died in 32.
I bet she was Russian.
Why they probably knew each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Stephen was just saying they might have known each other. Have discovered these graves and have also memorialized their ancestors with the headstones, so the people have not been forgotten about. It certainly goes to Mr. Ruskin's credit. He was a former teacher and he's gone blind. He's started a memorial business, and he is the person who has done the most to recover this cemetery and bring families back in touch with the grave sites of their families. Very moving being here. Just wonder what it must have been like. Here is Philip Bogdanov, died the same year as Grandma, gone but not forgotten. People that died here the same year Grandma did, 32. And some of these stones are new and some are old, but one would assume that since it was a pauper's grave, that many of the stones were placed here after the deceased was buried. Looking at the small, looks like a metal marker, tin marker, that he thought might be the original marker, and here's...
Label, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think there must have been something attached to it.
Mm-hmm. Here's more.
See, this is what I'm talking about. The person's name probably was right there.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously with time.
You see that the average ages of these people, and these are mostly women, 24, 26, 30, 25,
21.
looks like they were all probably died from tuberculosis in early adulthood.
Look at the wild irises. This must be very pretty in the spring. All these are irises. They've naturalized.
Mm-hmm.
This would really be pretty in the spring.
On the other side is the cemetery for the well-to-do Jews, the Jews who are not impoverished. It's very well taken care of, naturally, probably for perpetuity. It stands in contrast here to the pauper's grave. Mr. Ruskin has been quite instrumental in improving, and that there's phases of the improvement that they are planning here with grant money and with donations. Even in death, people are separated by class. Grandma's at the top. She's at nearly the very top near the highway. Try to give you a feeling for what the cemetery is like here. There's more of the old metal markers. We assume these were the original markers, the metal markers, and they were replaced by the better headstones later. That's what we're assuming. And again, across the road is the cemetery for the more well-to-do. What Mr. Ruskin is going to do through his association is have this moved in front of the pauper cemetery. That's the next phase of the reconstruction of the pauper cemetery. Then they'll be followed by a security fence. Then they want to bring water to the pauper's grave so that people will be able to plant flowers and they'll be able to take care of the lawn. Fannie, Hazine, August 6, 1911. This wrought iron gate here. And this road would take us back up the hill to the Pauper Cemetery. Here's the new highway next to it, here in Denver. And then here's the newer portion of the Golden Hill Cemetery. Grandma Fannie, before we head back. Bye, Graham. Wish I had a chance of knowing you.